AOMA exhibition throughout the course of the year, then do feel free to have a look on the FaceTime website and go through the content there. So the things we've got coming up, we run a series of exhibitor masterclasses. So some of you may have already heard of Alastair Herbert, who has been a speaker at some of our exhibitor masterclasses in the past. Our next masterclass is on March the 10th at Excel. We'll be opening registration for that in the new year and promoting more about the content that we'll have during the course of the day. So the masterclasses are a one-day sort of training experience for you to come and learn about sales on stand, how to put a stand together, how you, the behaviour of your team, and also looking at how you can engage with the visitors before the exhibition, during the exhibition, and obviously following up after the exhibition as well. Then we also have a series of 15 advisory videos on the website. These take you through the exhibiting process, right from setting out your objectives that you want to get out of the exhibition, and then right at the end looking at what your return on investment has been and how you can calculate that. And the reason we've put videos and guides together on the website is so that if you're unable to come along to the masterclasses, or you've been to previous masterclasses and you think actually that content is really great, is to be able to share that with your teams back in your organisations. So, you know, whether you're presenting to your teams about your next exhibition, is talking through the different functions within your business, what they need to be doing to help you get the most out of the exhibition. Then the series of webinars, so this is our third in the series of webinars that we're doing. We do look at the feedback from the masterclasses on what's gone well, what else you'd like to hear about, to put the webinars together so that you can sit at the desks and learn as you go. So we are putting a programme together for next year, and we will be announcing that shortly. The first of the webinars for next year is likely to be at the beginning of February, and we'll be looking at stand design. And I think I've briefly touched on the guides. So again, there are guides about email marketing and you know, what to do last minute and who you need to be talking to make the most of your exhibition experience. So touching on email marketing, Alastair will be running through some of the language that you need to be using both in your pre-exhibition communications, but also actually at the event, and how the difference can make to both to your brand and the teams that you use. So Alastair, I'd like to hand over to you now, if that's okay.
Hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. We just switched through to our presentation. What we're going to talk about today, I'm going to take you through a little introduction to us, and then some explanation really of why language is so important, and then a bit of the science behind that, because language has become, it's easy to think of words that are just they're so frequent, it's almost you can think of them like air, but effectively they're the oxygen of human communication. And I think it's important in a masterclass to be able to understand why words are so important to human beings, and then again to show you 3 ways that you define your brand voice. And one of those is pretty straightforward, and the other 2 are slightly more complex. Jenny, I'm not getting through to the next slide at the moment. Jenny?
So you should have that now. Is that working for you, Alastair?
No, I'm still seeing your cursor moving, and I'm still.
Okay, I'll take control, and you tell me when to change the slides, Alastair.
That'll be great. So we're thinking about language. So if we can move onto our presentation, I've still got the exhibitor masterclass slide up. I'm not sure about everybody else.
Alastair, I'm going to change presenter so you've got control.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Here we go. Apologies for the delay, everybody. We will be walking through this pretty quickly. Fundamentally, just give you a bit of background to Lingua brand. That's the company that I'm a founder partner of. Lingua brand is, we're brand voice experts, and we work with organizations to help them find their voice so that they're able to communicate better and actually persuade more. So what we're going to show you today is three big areas that will help you communicate more clearly and ultimately to help your brand become more persuasive. Sorry, we're just loading up the slides at this end. So we work with a number of brands that you will know, but we work with different types of businesses, large and small. Fundamentally, at the moment, some of the biggest people that we work with are people like Samsung, that we've helped understand the psychology of switching. We've helped people like Adidas understand the underlying psychology of the sportswear market, and we work with people like Eurostar. If you've travelled over to Paris, you will probably have seen you probably would have seen Eurostar's Stories Awaiting campaign. If you think about that, what that's done is actually change Eurostar from an organisation that was simply running trains through a tunnel, which is pretty much as commoditized as you can get, to an organisation that owns the emotional relationship between London and Paris. And the last time we were at an AO masterclass in Liverpool, we were talking with somebody who made industrial components just before I spoke, and within 5 minutes we were able to isolate the emotional elements of his business. He was thinking, well, we have this, what does this mean for us? But whatever business you are in, you are going to be talking, and it's important to understand why. That's why we're going to go through the science here, to understand that language is a very, very important psychological tool that you can use. So at the moment, we're working with Birkbeck at the University of London, and we've identified online conflict with them, and also the roles within conflict. And we work very closely with the University of Texas at Austin with their psychology department, because as any psychologist will tell you, if you listen to people and you really understand people, then you can work out how they're thinking. What we do is use software to analyze perhaps millions of words, either from brands talking or consumers talking, and then change the brand voice to help you be more persuasive. So if all that sounds a bit complicated, I'd just like for you to consider one thing. Business itself is incredibly simple. It's very easy for us when we're in the middle of it to think that business is an extremely complicated thing. But when you're talking to a psychologist who's dealing with things like grief and mental health and drug addiction and criminology, they can't believe how easy business is. All we're trying to do is make and maintain relationships. So what do we do to do that? Lots of money is spent on planning, sorting out where we want to be. So think about this like speed dating. You know, who do you want to go out with? Those are your customers, or perhaps it's not just your customers. It's people you want to join your company, or partners, or potentially investors. And then people spend an awful lot of time on looking good. So when we're talking about communications, visual is very, very strong, and people spend a lot of money on brand design, on product design, on logos, on things looking good, on all their digital content looking good. Then there's money that's spent on advertising. That can be online, or it could be direct mail or email. Effectively, when you're trying to get somebody to come into that relationship with you, that's what you're trying to do. And of course, then you meet people. That can be physically at an exhibition, but it could also be via an email, it could be digital, or it could be face-to-face. So fundamentally, there's no need for us to think about business as being too complicated. So if you have any questions at any stage, incidentally, during this webinar, just put them into that box and we'll read them out and answer them so everybody can hear them. Sorry, we'll just move on here. So we spend all of that time and money, and just remember how many dates that you've been on, where you've been out with somebody, perhaps a blind date or friends introduced you to somebody, and you meet somebody, you think, well, they look good. And then what's that the first thing that you have to do to be persuasive is to open your mouth. You have to talk. And I bet you've all been on a date where somebody's opened their mouth and you've gone, oh no, you know, that the looks don't back up what people are saying. And the reality is that brands are only spending about 15% on what they talk, what their voice is like as to what they look like. But it's actually your looks attract, but it's your voice that persuades. And that's why it's really important that you should be thinking and investing time and effort and resources in your brand voice, because the only two senses that you can use to communicate over distance are really what you sound like and what you look like. So talking about dating, here's our favourite couple. And Spock is a really interesting man, because actually in business we tend to think of people acting like Spock, that they are rational and logical, and that they are interested in functionality. The reality is that actually humans are much more about emotions, whereas Spock is entirely about logic and awareness. And it's important that we have our functionality and that we have our functionality right. But for human beings, we're only aware of about 95% of what we feel. Sorry, of 5% of what we feel. 95% of what we feel, which is what we act on, we're not aware of. And that's because the front of our brains is very, very good at stopping us from going mad, because we have so much information coming in that we can't process it and deal with it if we're aware of it all, because we wouldn't be able to function. But it's what we feel that makes us act, and that's a really important thing, because if you are going to make a persuasive case for your brand and for people to have a conversation with you, it's extremely important that you connect with their emotional and social and aspirational side, not just their rational, individual and functional sides. But if you ask people why they do things, we will give answers, but the reality is we don't know why we do things. Think about the polls being so badly wrong at the last election. But as soon as the exit polls came out, i.e. what people had actually done, not what they said they were going to do, those exit polls were incredibly accurate. And so many businesses and brands fail, but they invest a lot in research, but the research isn't being asked in the right way. So what we do as an organisation at Lingua Brand is understand that language is a massively important source of information for how people are thinking and how people are feeling and how people want to be persuaded. So that's why language is so important. So moving on from there, we're going to talk through 3 things that you can do. Now, if you only take away one of these things, stick to the Spock thing, which is going to be about clarity. And then there's 2 Kirky ideas, which are about making emotional connections to people and starting to make your brand way more persuasive than your competitors. In reality, most brands, 58% of what they're talking about, their propositions, 58% are generic. Okay, that's only 42% of what brands talk about is different. So just basic propositions tend to be generic. So these are very, very important and easy ways for you to start differentiating your brand and being relevant. So quite often we come across people, because we are very, very keen on people communicating clearly, and quite often we will come across people talking about dumbing down. There is really no such thing as dumbing down. What we talk about is thinking up, and there's lots of research that's demonstrating that if you use language which is too complex, people don't actually think that you're clever, they think that you're stupid. that is not only from Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. There was a big study that came out about 4 or 5 months ago that backed this up again. So here's a really interesting statistic. Why is it then that the business average reading age is 19% more difficult to understand business content, that's websites or digital content, than it is to read the FT? Extraordinarily clear communicators. They communicate at a reading age of 15.2. So we measure these through a number of algorithms that take in length of sentences, number of syllables, the number of the amount of punctuations being used. But you can see that the population average is 13.5. Okay, so there is really no excuse for businesses to be talking to people in a way which is more complex than the FT, but that's exactly what's happening. So let's think about clarity and what you shouldn't do and what you should do. So if there's nothing else you take away from this, these are very, very important lessons. The first thing, it is extremely important to understand what you want to write before you start writing. So we always say clarity of thought is the mother of clear communications. Don't think we've got to say something and now I'll start writing. And when we're talking about writing here, we're talking about not just writing, but also communicating on stand. You know, be very, very clear what your propositions are. You know, understand, make sure that everybody knows why your business is going to make the world a better place. And also, when you're writing emails, it's incredibly important that you don't start doing things like saying, I am writing. Not only is that a statement of the obvious and therefore it's redundant, the problem with that is that that said, you haven't really thought, I am writing too. Okay, so don't experiment with people. Communicate what you want to say. Quite often, particularly when people are speaking on the telephone, they will talk about, you were speaking to myself, or I was speaking to yourself. These aren't ways that people communicate in everyday conversational language, and it sounds incredibly self-important. We would advise you very strongly not to use language that is trying to make you sound important or posh. Just be yourself. Don't use long sentences. We've come across sentences that organizations are using that are 80 or 90 words long, and it's very, very difficult to read. That pushes up your reading age. We can't abide these cliches. Thank you for let's touch base or reaching out. These are ideas that are fun that we pick up from America and think that is how we should talk in business. We urge you not to use these. If you want to check up on this, there's a very, very good video out at the moment. If you check out Pentangle rap, and it's a very, very funny mixtape of the type of rubbish that we tend to talk about in business. Spelling errors. It's really important not to send out spelling errors, even spelling errors. It's okay on a mobile because people accept that you are on mobile. The spelling error here is clearly deliberate. Just be clear that it we're using. But most importantly, never ever send an email without rereading it. and we're going to talk about things that you should be doing. Okay, and most of the time, if you're looking at an email, you're sending something out, or you're writing content, it's very, very important to say, what are we doing here? What are we trying to achieve? So do invest time in important communications. With a client like Samsung, we will quite frequently take half an hour sending out an email which has probably got only 7 or 8 lines in it. When you have a client that is really important, it's extremely important that you communicate with them at your best. So spend time and be yourself. This is a really important thing. Something tends to happen when people when they pick up the phone, or when they're in meetings, or when they start tapping on a keyboard. What happens is we tend to start talking in some sort of corporate language, but be yourself. You know, recognize that you are representing your company, but be yourself, and make sure that if you're writing an email, what would you actually say if this person is sitting in front of me now? And that is a very, very good exercise in communicating clearly and coming across as you. So when you do start an email, don't start with "I am writing." Try not to start with "I" at all. Try to start with a sentence that has you in that sentence. If you can start with a you, that's good. You don't have to force that, but make sure you have a you in the first sentence. Be brief. Edit, edit, edit. Reread, and if you can take something out, or if you're saying, well, I'm saying the same thing here twice, take it out. Remember, people are busy. We believe in ending with a question as well, particularly if you want to get responses from people. That may be a question that might just be, does this sound sensible to you? Does that make sense to you? Because you're ending with a you as well. Reread what you've written and then reread it again. Don't be afraid to ask somebody else. We often do this within our team. So just could you take a look at this? And even if it's a small change, what is good is it shows that everybody's picking up a style as well, so you're not keeping things to yourself, and that you're learning from other people and their skills. So ask others to check things that are important. Okay, so I hope, does that all make sense to you? If you've got some questions, then do put those to me. So we're ending with a question on clarity. So this is really important do's and don'ts. So you'll have access to this afterwards. So that's a sort of logical, rational approach. But now I'm going to talk about something which is much more about how language gets to the heart of how human beings think and feel. And these are largely subliminal. So I just want to talk about a type of language that we have, that is conceptual language. So we hear these sorts of dreadful, things like solutions and products. Normal people in normal conversations don't use these words very often. So it's important, I mean, we used to talk about verbal identity being the consistent delivery of competitive brand language. But the brain has to work very hard to understand what these things are. And what's interesting is a lot of these things will mean different things to different people. So what is ethical, for example? What is innovation? These are difficult words to understand. It's much, much easier for people to understand sensory language. And the reason that sensory language is very, very powerful is because we actually feel sensory language. So if I use words like kick or kiss, I've fired up your motor systems just by using those words. So this is a really, really excellent tool for business communications. If we're using sensory language, brains don't have to work hard to work out what it means, because we feel these things, we see them, we taste them, we touch them, and we hear them, and we can spell them when those words are used. So they are incredibly brilliant at building up affinity with people you're talking to or writing to. So let me give you some examples. When you're at an exhibition, you're able to deliver a multi-sensory experience. So the more senses that you engage with, the stronger your communications. You know, when we communicate, if you remember, the only senses we can communicate over distance and to many people are our voice and what we look like. But when we're face to face, you know, we can use smell and taste and touch as well. And at an event, it's an amazingly strong sensory experience, which is why they're so successful. Which is why we had some fun with our friends at the AEO, so talking about some of the language that that big event organisers are using. And interestingly, despite the fact that they are delivering these multi-sensory experiences, actually they use virtually no sensory language. So here's a sort of over-the-top example of how you can take something which is changing it from conceptual language to something which is using sensory language. So we wrote this just to show you that you can use all of the senses. And I think you'll agree, it's actually quite a long sentence, but I think you'll agree it's painting a picture straight away of something that is happening. So we've moved from dry, functional, conceptual ideas into something which you can connect with very quickly without even thinking about it. So use sensory language, but there is something even better than sensory language, and this is fundamental to the way that human beings communicate with one another, and that's metaphor. So when we're talking about metaphor, we mean describing one thing in terms of another. So we experience our world through our senses. As children, babies, we are entirely, and as adults, we are entirely connected to our world through our senses. But as we grow up, what we do is connect. We connect things that we hear and smell and touch and taste and feel. We connect them to ideas, so that it's impossible for us actually not to talk in terms of other things, because that's the way our brains work. And one of the important elements of metaphor, and I'm going to show you some examples of this, so this isn't sort of just cliches like, you know, two sheets to the wind or towing the line, these sorts of ideas. It's actually fundamentally everything that is part of how we speak. So here is a quick, here was a news story from a few years ago. Britain's recovery from the worst recession in decades is gaining traction, but the outlook is clouded by confused economic data. The high risk of a hung parliament could yet snuff out its momentum. This is only 3 sentences, but it is loaded with 10 metaphors. This means that you have many choices. We have infinite choices how we tend to express things, but they all come down to some deep-rooted ideas. So Britain's recovery, Britain was an ill person. Worst recession in decades of containers. And it's gaining traction, so the recovery is a machine. The future is weather, the outlook is clouded. That means the future isn't clear, by confused economic data. You notice that's not confusing economic data. The economic data itself is confused. Clearly that's just a metaphor, because economic data is just economic data. And then spatial metaphors are extremely important. The work we did with Adidas was very much about them owning the up metaphor. If you've seen me talk at the AEO, I always point out that this isn't just about this isn't just intellectual stuff. This is about how human beings behave as well. We are very much influenced by the language that we use. So and this idea about height is extremely important. You will earn more money at the top of an escalator as a busker than at the bottom, because that we feel much more positive when we go up. Think about flags flying. When do flags come down? You know, it's all around us. This idea of things being up and down. So you can see that this is a very powerful and persuasive piece of writing because it is so full of metaphors. So I'll give you some examples of this. Look at the way we talk about money. We talk about these terms: flotation, topping up pensions, splashing out on something new. And so we're actually talking about money as water. So, or money as a liquid is also quite difficult to hold on to. But when you think about coins, you know, where has this come from? It's come from our physiological engagement with money. So coins not only move like you could use sensory language. What do? We're making hot stuff. Okay, just by using that word hot, you've upped somebody's temperature very, very slightly. It's a much, much more powerful statement, but metaphor is even better. So you could say, what do? We turn water into wine. Really? You can feel people lean forward when you say, we turn water into wine. You've got them engaged. That's a transformational metaphor. And you can obviously see that it's got some metaphysical overtones in terms of the Bible. But fundamentally, it's about change. We turn water into wine. It's a way more engaging statement than we innovate. So I'm going to close here with two men who are using 58 words each. So this is David Hay, who was the heavyweight boxing champion of the world 4 or 5 years ago. You can see that by the state of his eyes. And these are his 58 words before a boxing match. Okay, he has used 4 metaphors, which are about journeys. So he's approaching things, he's looking to find things, and he found something, and he sees his opponent as a container. So in Valuev, that's an Eastern European boxer, I found the biggest opponent I could prove to people, and that it's true. This is not a particularly persuasive piece of writing, and one that was instantaneously forgotten. There's another boxer who had 58 words to say. His 58 words are so powerful, not just because they rhyme, but because his 58 words are loaded with sensory language and with metaphors. So there they are. One of the ones which is most powerful here, which we really love, is George can't hit what his hands can't see. So the idea that his hands have got sight is an amazingly powerful line, amazingly powerful. So one of the reasons why Muhammad Ali was a brilliant communicator, one, he has the looks, but because his voice was so strong, because he was able to describe things in a way that connected with people. The science now shows us that the way he connected was using brilliant metaphor and masses of sensory language. So when you're thinking about your brand, make sure that you're using sensory language. When you've got people on, if you want to engage with people, speak clearly, turn on the sensory language and think about how you are describing one thing in terms of another. And ultimately, and we'll close on this, ultimately, when you think about your brand, it is just a metaphor. It means nothing actually in itself. It just stands for something else. So once you understand what your brand is and what people think it is and how they feel about it, you communicate those senses and those metaphors, and you will be a very much successful brand with a voice that is being true to itself. Thank you very much for your time.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Alastair. I think there's lots of food for thought there for exhibitors. I've got a couple of questions actually, because I was at an event yesterday, and we were talking about colours and how that can have an effect, a positive or negative effect on your brand and image on stand, and how using different colours to your brand colour can be quite disruptive and make people take notice. How would that work with language, and is it difficult for larger companies who've got sort of a corporate brand to be more personal with their target audiences, or do you think it's just as easy as it might be with a smaller company?
Yeah, I think it's probably easier with a larger brand that's got some traction already than it is with a smaller brand. A smaller brand has got to be noticed. The thing that's really important is that brands are different, and that's the purpose of brands. If you're not different, then you're not going to be in business for very much longer. You know, you'll be bought out. You're not going to be able to charge a premium. You're just going to be a commodity. So finding your voice is really very strongly related to your brand values and what you're about. So in terms of, if you're thinking about a brand, maybe the key things about, you know, you might say something like, oh, we're a friendly brand. Well, that will change the language that you use. And when we're working with our clients, we actually measure their tone of voice and then deliver that to deliver their values. So it's important that, you know, if you're a brand that is about strength, for example, that you don't use a lot of tentative language. You know, you need to be quite firm, and the visual side of things should be backing that up. So the key thing, I think, for people who are listening today with us is to think very clearly about what your brand stands for, and think, okay, so if our brand stands for, you know, maybe it is being clever or being curious or being really passionate about something. You know, some people think that's a cliche. I don't think you need to talk about those things. What you need to do is to deliver in that style, and that comes down to perhaps the way you're dressing, particularly with people on a
Mobile channel. Can your language differ depending on the channels that you're using, and how far away from the sort of
we hear an awful lot about brands who say things like, oh, well, of course we can be more chatty on Twitter, or we could be more chatty on Facebook. And I just ask that question, really? So, you know, it's like somebody saying, as an individual, that, you know, as a business, you've got to deliver consistently. I don't think if you're not delivering consistently, then you're wasting resources. And I think clearly it's important that people are individuals and are natural. But when you're representing an organisation, it's important that you deliver what the organisation is trying to do. So a good example here is you remember when things like, if anyone's a football fan, if you buy a football programme and you get these awful adverts that say things like your winning team, or, you know, we will help you find your goals. Those things, you know, you don't have to say that. It's just a channel. You know, it's like people on a classical music station, on Classic FM, saying, you know, we've got to deliver your classic solution to something. It's just a channel. It's just a channel. And you know, clearly with Twitter, you've only got 148 characters. You know, you can do more on Facebook. But the big thing is, I think you've got to be consistently be your business is so simple. We're just trying to make relationships. So, you know, it's not as complex as an individual, where we may be talking differently. But so my guess is you're way better, and we're open for this one, but our feeling is pretty strongly that you just need to find your voice and deliver it consistently.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you for attending, everybody. I've just put up the final slide, which is the FaceTime contact details. If you do want to have a look at the website, it's www.facetime.org.uk, so that you can share those resources with your teams internally. So I'd really like to thank everybody for joining us today. Thanks very much, and thank you, Alastair.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. It's been fun talking with you.